In all the excitement about Avengers Endgame, you might have forgotten that another Marvel movie is coming out, but here at CBR, we've been getting hyped about the release of Spider-Man Far From Home, and we're almost done dissecting the latest trailer. We'll probably finish up as soon as the movie actually comes out. Get on board the hype train, choo-choo! And let's talk about some of the greatest things we spotted in the Far From Home trailer. Being a comic book fan can be a double-edged sword at times. Yes, you get a sneak preview of some big happenings in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but you also have to wait forever to see certain characters on the big screen. We've all seen Spider-Man face off against Dr. Octopus and the Green Goblin, but his incredible rogue gallery has been criminally underutilized. Mysterio is one of the most popular Spider-Man villains, and now we finally get to see him on the big screen. And as if that couldn't get any better, he's being portrayed by acclaimed actor Jake Gyllenhaal. We've been looking forward to this since we first saw leaked images of the Mysterio costume from the set of Spider-Man Far From Home. Hopefully Marvel will do the character of Mysterio justice and present him as a complex and nuanced character instead of someone who just wants to destroy the world or profit financially. The MCU has had enough of those, and frankly, characters like Eric Killmonger, Loki, and even Thanos have set the bar pretty darn high. Ever since he first popped up in the mid-credits scene of Iron Man all the way back in 2008, Nick Fury has been an integral part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Sure, he doesn't have any superpowers himself, but he's set many important plot points in motion and managed to bring together the heroes that end up saving the world from certain destruction. We know, so few people recognize the emotional labor required to organize groups of superheroes. Just ask Natasha Romanoff in Avengers Endgame when she was left trying to hold everyone together. But let's not dwell on that because we don't think Nick Fury's going anywhere anytime soon. He's back in action, scheming, plotting, and imposing his indomitable will on a new up-and-coming superhero. Not only are we getting the Nick Fury we know and love, but we also have some mysteries we can't wait to find out the answers to. Like, who is Nick Fury working for? His equipment looks like the kind used by the now-defunct S.H.I.E.L.D. Could the MCU be getting ready to introduce the organization S.W.O.R.D. from the comic books? It's possible a new group was set up in order to deal with the problems caused by messing with the time-space continuum in Avengers Endgame. Captain Marvel marked the first time a movie in the MCU featured a female hero since it started way back in 2008. Even DC beat them to the punch with Wonder Woman, which was just embarrassing. And they've even beat Marvel to an aquatic-themed superhero movie while we have Namor on our side. Ugh, but we digress. I mean, Marvel kinda wins with the talking space raccoon, but moving on. Captain Marvel was a great movie, which finally clarified that Carol Danvers' predecessor pronounced their name Marvel. But despite it being the name of the movie, we never actually heard anyone call Carol Captain Marvel. We were hoping she'd introduce herself as such at some point in Avengers Endgame, but she didn't during one of the brief moments she was actually on the screen. But in the latest trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home, we finally got to hear someone refer to Captain Marvel as, well, Captain Marvel. It's kinda crazy to think it took 3 movies to hear her superhero name said aloud, and it's a movie she isn't even in. Peter Parker really does speak for the audience when he asks Nick Fury where Captain Marvel is. We understand she's out there on important space business, blah blah blah, but we're glad we finally got to hear her name in the MCU. In the lead up to Avengers Endgame, we had a lot of questions about what would happen in the movie, but we also had some questions about Spider-Man Far From Home. How could Marvel make a movie based around Peter Parker if he was a smoldering pile of dust? Was it a prequel? Would it take place in a different universe or timeline? Would the decimation be undone at some point in Endgame? The latest trailer finally gave us the answer to these questions, and honestly, we couldn't be happier about it. Spider-Man Far From Home picks up right where Endgame left off, which means we got to see the ramifications of the post-decimation world. Sure, it's quite the coincidence that Peter, Ned, MJ, and Flash all just happened to get decimated and then restored, but we'll do our best to suspend our disbelief. Crazier things have happened, especially in the MCU. In the wake of the decimation, the world was transformed into a dark, gloomy place, but we saw it on its way to recovery at the end of the movie. We're looking forward to learning more about the ramifications of the restoration and how it impacted the greater MCU. You know what they say, more universes, more problems. Well, it's definitely something like that. Comic book fans know that while multiple universes certainly brings more problems, they also bring interesting storylines, characters, mayhem, and endless what-if scenarios. It's something we've been waiting for ages to see introduced into the MCU, and apparently it's a part of the fallout from the decimation and the events of Avengers Endgame. Nick Fury is still calling Thanos wiping out half of all life in the universe the snap instead of the decimation, which is kind of embarrassing, but hey, he's been gone for 5 years, so let's give him a break, folks. According to the latest Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, messing with the space-time continuum created another timeline from which Quentin Beck traveled. Wong warned us all the way back in Doctor Strange that messing with time and space was a bad idea, and many movies later, it turns out he was right. Even non-comic book fans were undoubtedly won over by the idea of a multiverse, thanks to the movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Yeah, okay, we know that that movie was made by Sony and not Marvel Studios, but we have enough love in our hearts for all versions of Spider-Man. And as we learned from the movie, there sure are a lot of them. One of the many things we love about Marvel characters is that they're realistic. Well, not so much the superhuman abilities and impeccably perfect hair, but more their personalities. Instead of giving us flawless superheroes, Marvel gives us flawed characters we could relate to. When Peter Parker was first introduced into the comic books, he stood out because he was a teenager who wasn't a cheerful sidekick to an adult hero. He was an awkward high school student who had to deal with making it to class on time, studying, talking to his peers, and fighting crime. Finding a good work-life balance is something many of us struggle with, and it's actually kind of refreshing to see that even having superpowers doesn't give you much of an advantage. In the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer, we see Peter desperately trying to enjoy his vacation, hang out with his friends, and score some FaceTime with the girl he likes. Time management may sound mundane, but it was a surprisingly important part of Spider-Man Homecoming, and it seems like a core component of Far From Home as well. Of course, we're excited to see Spider-Man taking down some bad guys, but we're glad he hasn't lost sight of what makes him a compelling, relatable hero. Speaking of dealing with issues, our Marvel heroes have been through a lot worse than a missed field trip. When people think of the dangers of being a superhero, they actually focus on physical injuries like broken bones and black eyes. But Marvel doesn't shy away from the fact that some experiences can leave scars that aren't necessarily visible from the outside. In Avengers Endgame, we saw Thor in the throes of depression, and this manifested in his complete inability to take care of himself and his desperate desire to escape. Tony Stark's trauma after the Battle of New York was a huge part of the storyline of Iron Man 3, and we saw him struggling to cope with PTSD-like symptoms. And it's clear that Peter didn't escape the events of Infinity War and Endgame unscathed. Really, it'd be ridiculously unrealistic if he did. He traveled to outer space to fight Thanos, died in the arms of his mentor and father figure, then was revived only to have his mentor and father figure pass away in front of him. The Far From Home trailer shows a Peter Parker who's clearly trying to cope with some seriously heavy issues, and we can't wait to see how he manages. Earlier, we mentioned that in the early days of comic books, teenagers who wanted to get into the superhero game were relegated to being sidekicks. But apparently, some of them are perfectly happy with that. Just ask Peter Parker's best friend, Ned Leeds. We were introduced to Ned in Spider-Man Homecoming and were immediately fans. How could we not like a character with such an appreciation for the art form of Lego? Peter was still learning the ropes, or webs as the case may be, about being a superhero. Sure, he had a connection to Tony Stark, but he couldn't even get his phone calls returned for most of the movie. Instead, Peter often relied on Ned when he needed a helping hand. Ned happily volunteered to be his guy in the chair and assist Peter with his superhero missions. But in Avengers Infinity War, Peter definitely graduated to the next stage of being a superhero. What with the whole traveling to outer space and helping save the world thing. In the trailer, it's made clear that he's now more than simply the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, and yet, Ned is a prominent part of the trailer, and we hope that means we're going to see plenty of him in the movie as well. We all know that the Marvel Cinematic Universe kicked off in 2008 with the movie Iron Man. Not only was Tony Stark first on the scene, but he was also an integral part of forming the Avengers and keeping them together over the years. Not only did we lose some of our favorite Marvel movie characters in Avengers Endgame, but we lost a great leader. Peter Parker was one of the people who was greatly helped by Tony while he was alive, and we know he's still mourning the loss, but it looks like Spider-Man is being set up to be one of the many great Marvel heroes of Phase 4, which starts immediately following Far From Home. We've been predicting that soon we're gonna get some much younger heroes in the MCU. We've said goodbye to Black Widow and Iron Man, and even Captain America has passed his shield along. We've already been teased about getting a new Hawkeye, so it's possible the Young Avengers may soon be a thing in the MCU. And if so, they'll definitely need some help, and Peter seems like a perfect candidate. If they build the fourth phase around him, then he won't have to go back to Sony and we can keep him in the MCU forever. Hey, we can dream, can't we? Earlier, we talked about how reading the comic books can give interesting insight and sneak peeks into what's going to happen next in the MCU. Of course, these movies stray quite far from the source material in most cases, but still. One of the big reveals in Captain Marvel were that the reviled, insidious Skrulls were actually perfectly pleasant, and it's the Kree who are incredibly dangerous. While it was shocking, it was also a way to shake up a very well-known comic book event, the Kree-Skrull War. Despite this big shakeup, we're still shocked by the latest Far From Home trailer, which presented Quentin Beck as a hero. Everyone knows Mysterio is a villain, even if you've never read the comic books. Seeing him acting like a hero was quite shocking, and made us all the more eager to see the movie and find out what's really going on here. Is the Quentin Beck from another reality genuinely a good person? Is he even from another timeline, or is that all a hoax? Is he just waiting to double-cross Spider-Man, or is he going to transform into a villain at some point in the movie? Marvel Studios definitely know that the best movie trailers leave us with more questions than answers, and they certainly did that here. One of the many things we love about Marvel movies is that they're a fantastic blend of lighthearted moments, laugh-out-loud jokes, and seriously heartbreaking moments. Over the years, it feels like Marvel Studios has perfected the formula necessary to tinker with our emotions and keep us on an emotional roller coaster through the whole movie. Thor Ragnarok had us cracking up at Korg's deadpan statements one moment, then mourning the loss of a hammer the next. You ever cried over a hammer? 'Cause I sure have. Spider-Man Homecoming was also a great example of the happy to unbearably sad type of Marvel movie. We all laughed when Peter Parker left a long voicemail about churros, and then got all worked up when Spider-Man was trapped under a pile of rubble. Based on the trailers, it seems like Spider-Man Far From Home is going to have a similar tone to Homecoming, and we couldn't be happier about that. After the giant emotional punch to the gut that was Avengers Endgame, we could use some levity in our lives, to be honest. Bring on the pop culture references, Peter Parker being awkward, and the Peter Happy Hogan dynamic. We've already talked about Tony Stark's role in the MCU, but frankly, do we really have to? If you're a Marvel movie fan, and we assume you are since you're watching this video, you know how important Iron Man was. Even if you weren't a fan of him personally, there's no denying he changed the superhero game. Where the MCU is concerned, he made the ultimate sacrifice in order to save the world at the end of Avengers Endgame. So we're glad that he's not forgotten. The latest Spider-Man Far From Home trailer made it very clear that, although Tony is gone, he's still very much alive in the hearts and minds of everyone. In typical Tony fashion, even his exit from this world was flashy and dramatic, and got everyone's attention, unlike poor Black Widow who just dropped off a cliff in the middle of nowhere. Even without all of the memorials dedicated to Iron Man, we have no doubt he'd be on Peter's mind. It's just nice to see he's not the only person mourning the loss of the late, great Tony Stark. We've made a big deal about how excited we are to see Mysterio in the MCU, and frankly, we're nowhere close to done talking about that yet, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing we're excited about in Spider-Man Far From Home. The trailer has shown that Peter Parker is going to have plenty of other enemies to fight, and yes, we're excited about those too. According to Far From Home director John Watts, these creatures come from the same sort of parallel dimension as Mysterio himself. Comic book fans believe them to be creatures known as the Elementals, and also think they may be paying tribute to other well-known Spider-Man villains. When a boat sails past, it's numbered ASM 212. ASM is a common abbreviation for Amazing Spider-Man, and Amazing Spider-Man number 212 was the first time we met the villain Hydro Man. When the Earth Elemental is visible, a car drives by with a license plate reading 463, which is the reference to Amazing Spider-Man number 4, which introduced the villain Sandman. And when we see Peter's classmates fleeing from a fire elemental, they run past a car with the license plate 2865 SEP. This is a reference to Amazing Spider-Man number 28, which introduced Molten Man. Remember when we said we weren't quite done talking about Mysterio? Well, one of the things we like best about his character is just how much he despises Spider-Man. In the MCU, many of the villains are treated as totally disposable. They show up, kidnap a hero's loved one, and then get defeated at the end of the movie. Their motivations are generally not very well developed, nor is their relationship with the superhero responsible for defeating them. But Mysterio has a chance to be a different kind of villain. Maybe one who won't be destroyed in a single movie, and one who has an issue with Spider-Man specifically. Yes, our little Peter Parker could finally get his very own nemesis. Oh, they grow up so fast. We've seen villains like Loki and Thanos lurk around the MCU for years, but it seems like they're both gone. Thanos was dusted in Endgame, and Loki, well, we're not sure where the heck Loki is, to be honest. But we love to see Spider-Man and Mysterio embark on a multi-movie rivalry with one another. We all know that Spider-Man doesn't need a fancy suit in order to fight crime and save the day. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Peter Parker learned he's capable of being a hero regardless of what suit he's wearing. But all of that being said, we have to admit, we get positively giddy with excitement when we see Spider-Man rocking a new supersuit. We've seen him wearing his standard Stark suit, the prototype Tony made for him in Captain America Civil War. It's a handy suit, but it doesn't have quite as many features as the upgraded version Peter had for Infinity War and Endgame. Then we have the cool black costume we saw Peter Parker wearing. The color makes us think of the stealth suit from the comics, but the style of the suit is very reminiscent of Spider-Man Noir. This suit showing up likely means that Peter is going to be embarking on some sort of covert missions where stealth is an asset. After all, you can't approach every mission by swinging onto the scene shouting wisecracks in a bright red suit, right? We're sure you've watched it at least once, so head to the comments section and let us know what you're most excited about from the Far From Home trailer. Before you go watch it again, click the subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.